Greetings, and welcome to this edition of Leadership Perspectives. The focus of this conversation was policy and paradigm. We hear from a leader named Matt Vosberg regarding paradigms that inform policies about athletic eligibility, as he shares his background and his role in leading a policy change in a high school district in Illinois. The story he shares became national news when ESPN aired a special focusing, in part, on work he and others were leading. This is Matt's leadership perspective. What's yours?
Matt Vosberg, currently superintendent at Bradley-Bourbonnais High School District. We are about 60 miles south of Chicago, and it's a high school only district, a high school of about 2,000 students, with about 45% of our students receiving free lunch.
Okay, thank you. And then just without going all the way through your resume, so to speak, just give us a feel for kind of what got you to this point professionally, what other roles you've served over time, just giving us a tidbit of your background.
I started out as a high school business teacher and coached baseball and basketball at the lower levels. Worked my way into administration as an assistant principal, became a principal, and then central office assistant superintendent, and then deputy superintendent. And this is I'm starting my 29th year in education and second year as a superintendent.
Great, thank you. In our topic today, we were interested in hearing about changes that were made in your prior role, I believe, right, regarding athletic eligibility and how you did or did not hold students to certain standards around eligibility and what shifts and changes you made. So I wanted to hear about that. And so as you talk about it, let's do where, pretend we're like shooting a documentary movie of this, but we're really not doing like every little step and more of a high level, flow diagram of what happened. Yeah. So start with the very beginning conversation or idea you can remember around this topic of shifting thoughts about athletic eligibility, then just kind of take us to the highlights from there.
Sure. That shift happened in the Rockford School District, Rockford, Illinois, about 70 miles northwest of Chicago. Larger district, about 28,000 students, urban population with probably 75% of the students qualifying for free lunch. I had actually served, so in 2011, I was an assistant superintendent, and that's when we started to make the shift with eligibility requirements. But I was there as an assistant principal in the early 2000s as they made the first shift from going from the state policy, where it was basically pass 5 classes to be eligible per semester, to a C average to be eligible. So I was there when that first transition happened, and I was not a fan of it at that time for a variety of reasons. But they had the policy for about 10 years, and on the surface, it seems fundamental. We're going to raise the bar for academic results to allow kids to participate in athletics. And so to a board member, and that's a board policy, seems like a logical thing to do, to use athletics as an incentive and get kids to work harder in the classroom. In practice, that's not really what happened. And so I saw this as an assistant principal for a few years, and then he had about 10 years to implement the program. What I saw happening was students not really improving their academic approach to school, but trying to manipulate the rules. So if they dip below a 2.0 average, for example, kids were coached by coaches, sign up for summer school online, take a BYU credit for $59. This is early 2000s. Probably double that price now, but and get an easy A, and we'll factor that into your GPA, and you'll get above a 2.0 and you'll be eligible. We saw kids leave the district. The ones that were immediately ineligible left the district to go to neighboring districts with the less rigorous standards. I saw kids double up on PE classes, take 2 PE classes so you can get 2 A's to balance out 2 F's or a couple D's and an F. So they were manipulating it, and so to me it was never a real standard. It was real standard would be in control of what the kids are actually learning in the class and coursework. So, and we didn't see any academic data, and we saw participation drop over time. And we saw coaches not interested in coaching schools with low numbers in athletics. So those are all things that kind of played into the conversation as I worked with board members to change the policy. As you can imagine, board members were not for the change. They thought we were lowering expectations. And when they bump into somebody at the grocery store, that's what they would hear also. You're lowering expectations.
Hey, let's pause. That's a perfect place. I want to pick right back up there, but let's pause and just to redefine. So the first change was it was passing 5 classes meant you were eligible. That was, and then there was a change to be at a 2.0 or above to be eligible.
The average to be eligible, yes.
Okay, and that changed after that shift. There was about 10 years of time living that shift.
Right.
And then you started conceiving of a change, and you mentioned, proposing something the board wasn't for it. They were hearing from people who weren't really for it. And you're probably about to, but if you'll just make sure to define what that proposal was.
So yeah, the proposal for the board was to go back to the state policy, the IHSA, our Illinois High School Association Athletic organization, pass 5 classes. And that was, you can have 5 Ds and pass. And so that's the state policy, and that was our recommendation, is to do what the state does. Again, board members and community members see that as a lowering expectation. So I spent some time explaining how kids were manipulating the system and coaches were manipulating the system. We didn't see any gains in graduation rate or standardized test scores to show that kids were learning more. And we saw a drop in numbers. We even saw kids who were eligible to participate decide not to participate on our teams because the teams weren't very competitive. They had low numbers and they had poor coaching. Coaches were deciding to coach other places where they didn't have to deal with some of these issues. So my approach with the board was to shift paradigms for them and look at athletics as an intervention and not as a privilege. I have 2 daughters. They're both out of high school. I can easily make athletics a privilege for them if I needed to. I really didn't have to. They were good students already. So, but I could do that as a parent, and I support parents that want to do that. But as a school system with a large population of students who are at risk, why not use athletics as an intervention, a reason to get kids connected to adults, usually teachers. Our coaches are teachers. Get them connected to teachers in our building outside the classroom. We provide some tutoring for students that were below, had Fs on their transcripts. So we were still providing academic support, but we weren't kicking them off the team as you did in the previous policy.
Talk a little bit about to your comfort around, was it your idea sort of as an individual, like I really want to press the system on this? Did you have a little bit of a coalition, or was it a committee or a group that came up with this idea and then you and others propelled it forward? Talk about kind of how how the communities aligned there, like a community for or against. Yeah.
Well, a lot of the coaches, as you can imagine, were against it from the day it was implemented, the original shift to a 2.0. So there was already and I had left the district for a while and then came back. So there was a coalition of coaches. We had a district athletic director who realized it was ineffective policy. However, didn't really know how to navigate the politics of it with the board. And so I pretty much led the effort on that as an assistant superintendent. And I oversaw a different athletic director. We had a new athletic director at the time, and we both actually worked together in a previous district. I was the principal, he was the head basketball coach. And that district had a similar policy, like a no F policy. And it was a high poverty district. And we went through the same conversation with that board about, look, we can make this a privilege. However, let's pretend like athletics is a tutoring program. Would you ever deny tutoring to your neediest students? Of course not. So why would we deny athletics to the neediest students if we think it's a good intervention to get them connected socially, emotionally, and even academically to their school? And so he and I did that work in a previous district. I did a lot of that again with the board. Same kind of arguments around lowering of expectations and people thinking like, hey, if we kick them off the team, they're going to go to the library and study. And that didn't happen. I wish it was that easy. We would do that in a second, but it's not. Doesn't work that way. So that was the coalition.
Right. And so then let's pick it up with you mentioned that there was some opposition. What are some of the key moments or factors that maybe got you around that bend? Because if I understand correctly, you ultimately did get enough support to revert to the other policy. So talk about the highlights of that.
Yeah, I think part of what helped out, as again, I was an assistant soup. I think having the superintendent at the time was interim. He was in favor of it. Again, it comes down to your board and having conversations with the board. They had 10 years of the previous policy and they didn't see any academic success. So I'm a numbers guy and I use data to show, like, if it doesn't work, why continue to do this? And then, so using the data and then paradigm shift, I think, is what worked with the board. And again, there's a couple board members that balked a little bit, but I believe it was a 7-0 vote when we put it before the board. So we were excited about it. And quite frankly, we were stunned. We got a call from ESPN maybe a month later. They had caught wind of that vote because it made the newspaper and they checked local news stories for different things. And so then then we became the subject of the show Outside the Lines. And that was really interesting, and it was good coverage, and that's why we're talking today. I've actually been interviewed by people from Omaha, Nebraska, from the newspaper there, professors in California. So it caught some momentum, and it was fun to have those conversations.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks for putting that piece in to add some context there. So when you then talk a little bit about after the board ends up approving it, and I hear you saying that a couple of key elements, and I want you to correct me if this is wrong, but you use some statistics, some data around how over those 10 years, once the policy had shifted to the 2.0, that you weren't seeing gains or improvements. So I hear that part. I also hear you talking about a little bit of a paradigm shift, and I think you're referring to the idea of thinking about athletics as an intervention as opposed to a privilege. Is that what you meant by the paradigm shift?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So kind of a two-pronged approach there. So then talk about, okay, board says, okay, you move forward. Does the community kind of just accept it and you move forward, or were there some things that happened over the next 2, 3, 4 or longer years?
There was a few critics. Former board members were critical of it, and because they voted for the original policy. Every once in a while, there would be a comment made by different people in the community about it. But we moved forward, and interestingly, the show Outside the Lines, they invited us back after 5 years, and we collected data, and we had a good, compelling story. And I think it's available on YouTube if you wanted to find it. But we showed that actually, after we eliminated the 2.0 GPA requirement, we had an increase in participation. Of course, we knew that would happen. But what we did see also was an increase in the GPA for student athletes over that 5-year period of the first 5 years of that shift. I can't explain how that exactly happened because there's a lot of different variables there. I know, like I said earlier, we had teams that were not competitive, and they had kids that were good students that didn't even go out for the team because they didn't want to be a part of a team that was not going to win or even be competitive. So I think we kind of brought life back into our athletic programs. The athletic director that I worked with, we started noticing that we'd have teams that were winning, and it was like, hey, this team won the conference, and they haven't done that in 20 years. And this team won a conference, and we had someone in the state, and that has that. So we compiled a list, and I can email it to you if you'd like to see it, of all the, like, first, we call it the first in 10 years, first in 20 years, all the different things that happened with our athletic programs from a competitive standpoint, all while getting more kids to participate and seeing that GPA go up a little bit. Definitely didn't go down. I think we had 1 year where it kind of dipped, but consistently over 5 years, we saw an increase in the GPA for all of our student athletes.
Yeah, and talk about, I imagine there might have been some noise from surrounding schools or districts. What, if yes, what were they saying, and how did that impact you and your the adults and the students, if at all? So the external quote unquote noise and how it may have impacted different parties.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of that. Again, there's some former board members that were vocal, and we kept the data. We let the numbers do the talking for us to demonstrate that we weren't just rolling out the balls and letting kids participate, and that we still have academic standards for kids. We do have expectations for them. We have mandatory tutoring for students who were falling behind, and athletes who were falling behind academically. So we had supports for students, and it wasn't really about, I think that's where the policy originated, is there was a perception that the coaches didn't care about academics and that they just put kids on the team and wanted to win games, and they weren't there to provide support for kids academically or developmentally. And so we worked to dispel that myth, because that never was the case. Of course, there are bad examples out there of times that could happen, but again, our coaches are teachers, and I was a teacher and a coach, and I had influence over kids because they are on the team that other teachers did not have influence over, and they would come to me as the coach and say, "Could you talk to Johnny here? He's not doing what he needs to do in class. I know you're his coach," and so those that are close to athletics and close to scholastic athletics at the high school level, they already know about that dynamic. Board members not necessarily don't know that dynamic, and so educating on that was helpful too.
Okay, thank you. And when you think about your leadership and just that was a unique experience that, as you mentioned, you actually had a variation of it prior, which I'm sure helped. But as you reflect back, what did you learn as a leader that might transfer into other conversations you're having, or policies you're trying to push against?
Good question. I would say two big takeaways. Number one, when you're having a conversation with policymakers, make sure you're trying to solve the same problems. And so, their solution to a problem was, we want kids to do better academically before they play sport. And my approach was, our problem is getting kids connected to the school first, and then start with academics, because we have so many kids. The district is still hovering around a 70% graduation rate. So 30% of our kids are not graduating. And we know that we need all hands on deck, as many adults as possible connected. And so making sure you're trying to solve the same problem is first. And then number two, the use of data to make your argument, having data there to show the numbers, to show what's working, what's not working. And if you have a policy that's around academic success, what are the measures that you're looking at to show that it's working? And they didn't really have any of that. They just went off of a belief system that if we kick kids off a team, they're going to go to the library and they're going to study more and get their grades up. And some kids would do that, but on the whole, that wasn't what happened. And we didn't raise academic success or academic output across the district with that more rigorous, what I would call false standard.
Yeah. Did you say false standard?
False standard. Yeah. A 2.0 is a false standard when you're not determining what courses kids take and online stuff to do in the summer.
Yeah. And what about, if you can recall, what are a couple of mistakes that you made in these processes, either in the district we've mostly talked about, Rockford, or the prior one? And they may not have been huge mistakes, but just things like, oh yeah, probably would do that differently if I could go back.
I'd say as a leader with a vision on something, you're always kind of ahead of people on what you believe in and what you think should happen. And if you want to persuade people to see your vision, start by finding out what their vision is. Start by trying to get them to convince you of their vision around maybe the same goal. And so I think leadership, to me, listening is a big part of communication. And even though you could have all the data on your side and all the facts and history and experience as a leader to be more knowledgeable, really digging in and listening and asking the questions about what is the problem you're trying to solve, and how will you know if you've solved it? What will we look at to know that it's been solved? Would have been a little better approach maybe to some. That you're not in that situation where you're just trying to persuade them about your beliefs, that you're getting them to try to persuade you on their beliefs, which could be more beneficial.
Yeah, so to repeat, I think I hear you saying a couple of things. Number one, try not, you may already be in chapter 5, of the book you're writing and the vision you're leading, but you can't start on chapter 5 with other people. You got to go back to the beginning. And then I also hear you saying that even if you are going, starting on chapter 1, it's not necessarily you reading chapter 1 to them. It's
Right.
you listening to their chapter 1 and
Right.
then finding, I'm sensing you're talking about finding and what do you kind of have in common? Like what's the same in your chapter 1? And then stemming off from there, correct me if that's.
Well, yeah, finding maybe a common problem you're both trying to solve, but also allowing them to articulate why they think this problem needs to be solved, because often they might not have a lot of basis for that. They might just be going off their gut. Board members tend to do that. So going off your gut is okay if it's you and your household, but you're talking about the lives of other people. And so really pressing them on what's the problem you're trying to solve, and digging deeper on that. And they might be trying to solve a problem that they can't solve, and you might have to help them figure that out. So so that I think is a lesson in that scenario, but applicable to all scenarios with leading other adults, leading board members.
Let's do just 2 more kind of shorter prompts. First one, if you can think of one for, I used to think, now I think. So like you've been in educational leadership for quite a while. I used to think, now I think, and more in terms of like a statement, if that feels too broad. Okay, a lot of people want to pause on that one.
Yeah, let me think about that. Boy, okay, well, this might sound self-serving, but I used to think educators thought like I do, and now I realize a lot of them don't. So I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but
I think it's a powerful thought.
Yeah,
right. That idea of like not assuming that everybody is right where you are. Right. I heard you reference that earlier.
Yeah, I think you first learn it when you leave the classroom and become a building level administrator, and you work with other teachers and help solve problems they're having that you never had as a teacher, because they don't think the same way. And so some things you take for granted about why you're in the profession and how to best do the work isn't necessarily what everyone else believes and thinks. So you have to think about, and again, be a listener more than a persuader. I think that's something I'm kind of a natural at, is being persuasive and having a plan. And in leadership, you have to have ownership of your plan, and it usually entails other people implementing your plan. So listening to them and making sure that their voices at the table, that they've been listened and heard, and they have an opportunity to solve a problem that you think needs to be solved.
We hope you found it interesting to consider how paradigm, beliefs, and ways of thinking can relate to policy and how a leader may invite others to consider a shift in paradigm. We heard Matt's leadership perspective. What's yours?